Hi, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about the origin of reactivity in my computer games. I had a lot of fun talking about the origin of dumb characters and the origin of flawed characters. And all of this goes back to early tabletop games that I would play with friends and coworkers. Now, I already talked a little bit about reactivity when I talked about how, when I was teaching GURPS at Interplay to people who never played, I made a single dungeon and ran 3 groups through it, and it all was wildly different. And people thought the dungeon was different. No, it was a tiny 6-room dungeon. It was just they were playing differently. Excuse me. And then turns out the origin of all this goes way, way back to early high school when I first started playing D&D. My main group, I played with literally over a dozen different people, but my main group were 3 high school friends, Joel, William, and Steve. They all played very differently, so I want to talk about each one of them, but there's a common theme here, and then they did things that I never expected them to do, and I just had to react. I talked about Joel's 3 dexterity cleric. A lot of fun with him. When he was surprised, he was harder to hit, and this is a character that had to burn everything coming off of him, so he eventually used a green slime pit to get rid of those things. Well, another aspect of his religion was he had to hide his temple. So in the course of adventuring, they had come across an old monastery with a couple dungeons below it. There's ruins. The monastery was ruins on the surface, and the dungeons were full of monsters. So they cleared it all out. Joel decided that would be the greatest place for his temple, but not the first dungeon level. He put his secret temple on the second. They left the ruins on top alone, and then the first level dungeon, which was he considered the buffer, he made that into his own personal dungeon. He hired a thief and had the magic user in the party dimension door him in and out of the temple, and the thief put up traps on the first floor. Then after they dimension door him out, Joel went through and added extra glyphs of warding since he was a cleric. So now the whole dungeon level was trapped. Then he started seeding it. Every time they'd go on an adventure and they'd find a cursed item, that went in there. His green slime pit, he put green slime in different places in the dungeon, first floor of the dungeon too, as traps. It was such a wild floor that at one point, since he was the only one who knew it, he ran the other players through it as a dungeon level, and they hated it. They said it was worse than Tomb of Horrors, which if you've played, that's a Trappy dungeon. So Joel was really liked that. But he finally got frustrated with only having a 3 dexterity, so he went on a quest to try to find gloves of dexterity, which when you put them on, boom, immediate 18 dexterity. He asked his mentor, a really high-level priest in the same religion, if he knew of any, and he said, I do, but they're very far away in these mountains, which are really treacherous to go through, and they're hidden away in a dungeon that's very treacherous. And Joel's like, I'm going to go get them. So he convinced the rest of the party to go. They went on this dangerous adventure. It was really, they almost got killed multiple times, but he got the gloves of dexterity, and he put them on, and he had 18 dexterity. Super happy. They head home, and they're not cautious at all. They just basically leave the dungeon and walk down the mountain. They get attacked by 3 cloud giants. 1 cloud giant is hard enough. 3, they do manage to defeat them, but a few people in the party die, including Joel's cleric. Now remember, this was far away. They rushed to get him back to his mentor who could raise him, but they missed the deadline. Remember, Raise Dead only works for so many days. They missed the deadline by 2 days. So this high priest tells him, I can do a resurrection, but it's very expensive. And I have to plead with the god to give me the spell. And I'll do it if you give me the gloves from the dead cleric. I mean, Joel was upset, but what was the option? So yeah, he got the gloves. He got to wear them for about an hour. Then he died. And then he got resurrected, and the price of the resurrection with the gloves. What's interesting is that entire quest was generated by me on his desire for gloves. Never did find any clues on where to find any more. He ended up retiring that character, and he made a new character that was a magic user named Scaramouche. And he made Scaramouche completely uncautious. Scaramouche would open doors, open chests, dive down wells, and die. And they'd get him raised, and he'd die again. And they'd get him raised, and he'd die again. His character sheet was a tombstone with multiple dates on it. He finally died so many times he couldn't be raised anymore because there's a limit, 1 per point of constitution. But a passing druid, very high level, agreed to reincarnate him, and he came back as a troll. And he's like, great, now I regenerate everything. A few encounters later, evil magic user fireballs the troll. He doesn't regenerate fire. Bye-bye, Scaramouche. The other 2 players, equally reactive stuff. William played a druid, and when he got high enough, he made himself a treehouse, not too close to the monastery that Joel had. At some point, they encountered a sphere of annihilation and an amulet attuned to it that lets you move it around. William decided that his druid was so eco-friendly that they dug a pit next to the tree, put the sphere of annihilation in it, and then covered that with an outhouse. As if that wasn't enough, there was a pipe coming down, wooden, he didn't use metal, wooden shaft that he threw trash in from different floors of the treehouse that would also go down into the sphere. And of course, the sphere was always available because William wore the amulet to launch at enemies. It would just burst out of the ground and absorb enemies. All clean and ecologically friendly. Then there was Steve. Steve played an illusionist. Now, he was a long-running character, so he eventually got up to level 14 where he could alter reality, which is kind of like a wish. But every time he did that, he aged a few years. So he never did that. He was so cautious. He was so careful how he played his character. That group, and I let each of them by that point have 2 characters, because that way they'd have 6 in the party instead of 3. They encountered fire giants. Tough. You'd think they'd learn the lesson from the cloud giants. No, they did not. They're fighting them. Several people in the party die. In fact, I think 4 of the 6 died, and all that was left was William's druid and Steve's illusionist. So the fight's over. 4 dead people, 2 living ones. Steve looks at the back of his character sheet and goes, I had a potion of fire giant control. William's face just goes flat, and he looks at me and goes, I kill Steve. I think I talked him off the ledge, but I don't think Steve realized how close he was to joining his 4 other party members in death. Now, these are all things that just happen. But it wasn't unique, again, to that group. Years later, I was in grad school. So, in my early 20s. And I convinced some neighbors and some friends of mine to play D&D with me. It was an interesting group. It was 4 women and 2 men. And they played D&D in a way I'd never seen before. I can only call it like super ultra cooperative. They shared everything. Items went to the person who could use it the best, not necessarily the person who was next in line to get it. They would use, if a cursed item dropped, they'd figure out, well, maybe someone can use it and the curse won't be that bad for them. They found an item that lets you cast firebolts and be immune to natural heat and cold and resistant to magical heat and cold. But the curse on it meant you couldn't touch anything metal or plant related. It would eventually rust or just dissolve off you. They had a monk in the party. The monk took it. He wore leather pants, and I think that's all he wore. He fought unarmed, and he occasionally could shoot firebolts. Now, a magical bow stick at one point dropped, and how rare is that? And he couldn't use it because it was made of wood. He ate mostly meat. I rolled that he could eat vegetable material, but he went through a lot of utensils. But the group adapted in a way I've never seen. If after a battle, they'd all applaud each other. When somebody did something great in battle, they'd tell them how great they were. They would parlay with monsters and try to get them to join their group. And one time at work, they ended up with a pixie in their group. Very capricious little pixie that often got them into trouble, but they ended up loving it. It was like the group mascot. Now, what was interesting is I often wondered why this particular group was like that. Maybe it was because it was mostly women. Maybe it was because we were in our 20s and I wasn't playing with children anymore. But one of the things I thought was we're all in grad school. So we all spent all day either getting yelled at undergraduates in classes where we were teaching assistants, or getting yelled at by professors in meetings where we were research assistants. So when we came to D&D that evening, we were done being yelled at by each other or anyone else. And it just became this nice, let's have fun. And I think everybody bought into that. And I loved that those D&D sessions had a totally different timbre and tone. But they did, like every group I ever played with, do things that I literally could not imagine. Catherine rolled a druid. She rolled a natural 18. But instead of putting in wisdom, she put it in charisma. Because she's like, I'm going to be the most beautiful druid anywhere. So the 6 of them are adventuring. They encounter an anti-paladin, Dirk. Dirk the Merciless. He captured them. And he captured everybody. Took all their stuff. Threw them in the dungeon. But he said, I will let your friends go. He said to Catherine's druid, I will let your friends go if you agree to marry me and stay with me. She was like, ugh. Now, Dirk did have an 18 charisma as well, but he was pure evil. But Catherine decided to do it. She said, I'll do it. Let my friends go. I'll stay with you. He goes, okay, I will. And they went off. He didn't let them go. They were still down in the dungeon, rotting. She eventually found this out, but she didn't know what she could do. She had none of her items. She was kept in Dirk's castle. She knew that his patron was a demon, and she found out how he talked to the demon. So she knew there was a bowl, and somehow it summoned the demon. She used it, and the demon knew who she was and what was going on, and pretended. He appeared, but he said, you have summoned, this bowl doesn't summon a demon, it summons your patron spirit, and I am the spirit of the forest, and I will free your friends for you if you agree to give me your soul when you pass. She's like, what? And he's like, we'll use it for the good of the forest. Here's a contract to sign. And that's what it said. It said, the next time you die, you won't be able to be raised, and your soul goes to this forest spirit. Catherine signed it. Of course, as soon as she signed it, the demon revealed himself. Said, I'm not a forest spirit. I'm Dirk's patron demon, and I own your soul. And she was like, but you're do the other parts. He goes, yeah, you signed it. And he snapped his fingers, and the party was removed from the dungeon. Catherine's druid was with them. They had all their items back, and everything was good. Until Catherine's character discovered that she was pregnant with Dirk's child. And her first reaction was, hey, my magical leather says that it adjusts to people's size, so will it adjust and be maternity leather? That was her concern. That started a whole series of side quests where occasionally Dirk would show up and he's like, I will have you back. And there was fights, and the demon would occasionally show up and go, don't forget me. It was a very strange campaign and unlike any I've ever run, but it was fun. And later on, I remember making video games and thinking, I've got a lot of lessons to learn here. 1, players never do what you think. 2, dialogue can be super fun and lead to some situations that just fighting cannot lead to. That is a good thing to do. And 3, players all have different ways of playing. They have different things that they think are fun. One of my groups loved building strongholds. One group loved being cooperative. One group was very competitive with each other. They all liked it. None of those were wrong ways to play. I had to react to them. I didn't force them into a mold. It also meant I had to keep a ton of side quests around because I never knew what they were going to do. I had lists and lists of side quests. Whenever I designed an area, I would often put other things in the area. I'd seed it. Well, there's a dragon up here. There's a cave of mystery over here. There's an evil necromancer lair down here, because I did not know if they were going to go to the dungeon. This really informed things like Fallout and Arcanum, which had world maps you could go across, and I had to make sure that those world maps were seeded with a lot of other things that had nothing to do with the main story arc. I also wanted to move away from the Ultima, you're here to do good. You're here and you have a goal. Get it however you want. The game will react. And if you act badly, it will react badly. But I didn't like this idea of, well, you're going to be a good character. You're here to be a hero. No, you're here to find a water chip. Any way you can. If it means killing everyone in Necropolis to get their water chip, great. So these things informed all my later tabletop campaigns, all my later video games. So I think it's very important that people, if you want to be a game developer, that you keep yourself open, that you're going to learn a lot of things from the different stuff you do. And also, players will be players, and you can't control that. So instead of trying to do that in an RPG, a computer RPG, just let them do what they want. Okay, that was fun.